Warm welcoming you back to this program, ThinkTech Hawaii's Humane Architecture. This happening to be the 352nd episode, and you're way past the 21,000 in the 1 to 100th viewer, but that's only on YouTube, because if you go to ThinkTech Hawaii, it's going to be exponentially be more. So today we have your triple, double trouble panel back here, because the old Richard Nixon, the press and the professors of the problem, is back here three times, because we're all in education, and we're also in the press here, thanks to you, Jay Fidell, and we have you, Pedro, back on this panel here. And your new motto, Jay, to focus on one thing, not to get like distracted by all the other. So this will be about the environment, but then again, in the humane architecture way, in a multifaceted way. So we start out regardless in a little bit of a newsfeedy way. We have multiple Auslandskorrespondenten, forest correspondents. This is my dear sister Cynthia here reporting from the fellow Mediterranean country of France, and she's in Paris. And one of the first pictures is this one that she sent me, and it resonated so well in multiple ways, because first of all, you see the trees are still naked. That's what happens in the Mediterranean is still tempered, so it gets too cold for the trees to keep their leaves all year round. But you see in the back, there's actually a building that keeps, first of all, it has leaves, and secondly, they're still on. And that reminds us of Jay some 9 years ago with 2,000 views on the ThinkTech website, having not spoken to me, but at that time AIA local president Scott Wilson, about why don't all the buildings in Honolulu have that, because we have that year-round climate that it could afford that. And look at you up there. Similarly nice shirt in front of a green building, which is the one over on the third Mediterranean country of Italy by Bury. This is the Bosco Verticale that became sort of the synonym for vegetated buildings. The one behind us, Pedro, reminds us, you as the art and architectural historians, this is a Jean Nouvel building with Patrick Blanc as the green consultant. And this is from almost 2 decades ago, go figure, right? So 10 years ago, UJ reminded everyone here of things even more 10 years ago elsewhere in the world. And another thing she didn't even see when she took the picture is right next to me. That is a rickshaw or a pedicab that came with you and were very popular when you came, Jay, in the 60s, and in the stupid late 80s. Reactionary running times, they were banned here in Honolulu. So we need these back. What else do we see? We see bicky bikes and with baskets, and we see pretty complete streets, because there's as many lanes for bicycles. For Jay, the bicycle pioneer here, we're together with Ben von McCully Bike. So thanks, Cindy, for reminding us all that. And also in Paris, we owe the audience to give the names of the 2 pioneers who live a totally off-the-grid, low-tech lifestyle in downtown Paris in a flat, and there's the link to it. And this is should be part of the shift move in what we have going on. And when you came, Jay, you brought all this because you brought I.M. Pei with you. 3 years before you came, he blessed us with Hale Manoa, which has these fenestration systems. You have a sliding panel that you can open and close, but when the trade winds blowing from the northeast get too strong, you open manually these little shutters. They're out of wood, and you get the breeze from below. How clever is that? And needless to say, for that reason, it will be about the book that we're writing about. And today that we took the students there to the left that you can see, what a beautiful, this is a kitchen, by the way. This is a communal kitchen. They all cook together. How beautiful is that, right? And I want to address the address code. So what do we wear as people, and what do our buildings wear? And we know this is political now, because this is how Trump had initially mocked Zelensky and saying, oh, you nicely dressed up for the meeting that blew up, right? So this is a hot topic of these days. And we, as you age, are building that piece of crap that you're seeing there, and I just happened to get off the bus, and there was this poor overly dressed guy there that's walking by that you see behind me. So to our host at the East-West Center, I was saying two things. I was saying, hopefully you guys keep doing well, because East-West Center is owned by the federal government. So I don't even want to say this on the show, because if the agents are out and doing research on who is against them, I might bring this to their attention, and they might either say, okay, now we pull the funding of this one. But then at the evening of the tour, the second next worry came when the news are out that there's a big sale going on in Washington at the national government. All the agencies they want to get rid of and sell. And I thought, well, maybe then this is the lesser of the two evils, but who's going to buy it? Unfortunately, not us as UH, because we're doing we do differently bad, but at the end it's, because here's the criminal, Pedro. Can you see your students being ripped off in a building that a studio of 260 square feet, which is exactly my square footage here. And I want to extend a thanks to my private philanthropist landlords that I continue to have, Mr. Basically here, Derek, and before the Stabex, who let me live for a decent rent. And the ones who bought it here continue that tradition. Whereas here, you charge them $2,000 for 260 square feet of basically, I had to look what artgerechte Haltung means. And the literal translation is species appropriate husbandry, weird American English language. Does that have to do with husbands or something? But that's how you can keep species, right? Either in a decent way or in an indecent way. I think this is like criminal how we do it, like we encage them. I mean, we have the bird flu going on, right? And that maybe we get a people flu here, because flu we have too, but an epidemic because we do this to people. But the worst is, okay, you can get cheaper for $1,433, being one of 4 people being squeezed in a 759 square foot. And look at these little closet spaces there that I don't see any window. And you got that communal kitchen that isn't communal because you can barely turn around in it yourself, never mind with your 3 other, and then you got 2 bathrooms for men and women separated. In the Hale and Manoa, by the way, when I had the luck to live in there for the first week, in my time here in Hawaii, the young female students didn't care for this old farty professor guy who used the same co-ed bathroom, and showers. That's how it worked back then in these good old days, Jay, when you came and blessed us with these things. And we need this back. So this is part of the shift movement. We previously called it Tropic Hearing. And we need your PP from last week. Paradising pedestrian versus the P3, peeing 3 times doesn't make it better. This is not public-private partnership, or it's one of the worst, where all these partners are evil. I feel really, really sad and guilty because I'm part of this organization. And Pedro, we talked about this a lot. For Ricardo Bofill, God bless him, he got sidetracked once towards the end of his life in 2010 with a W Hotel, but you guys never repeated that bad anywhere in Barcelona. It stayed the one main mistake, if we're allowed to say so. And we do these shows because we show how you basically, from there on do better. And you always say, yeah, quantitatively not enough, but at least quantitatively. So you, with Barcelona, show up left and right. And thanks, Jay, we're on Substack now. And sometimes Substack is referring to other media that we want to get off, which is the X there. But never mind that. This is what pops up there. This is just another architect of so many that we can't possibly not go through. These are Mayo architects, and this is from their website. Look at that. I mean, this is a POMO sail, that has nothing to do with sailing and wind, because it's a microwave that is, shaped in the form of a sail. And this is a performative sail because they use real, sail fabrics as to clad the building with, as to keep it cool. And never mind, Jay, go back to the very show quote with Scott Wilson, right? There it is. That's what they do. But we have this guy here with us, you Pedro, who you were only missing last week because you were on the final sprint of this great article. And so here you see our communication about it, and you got it out, and here it is. So thank you for showing us even more. But we got to go basically first cover what we had started with, and then we'll eventually get to all the new goodies. So this is picking up where we had left, close to Park Güell with Gaudí. There is it goes up the hill, and it looks like a pretty upscale neighborhood, but you know, these buildings have lanais and they have planter troughs, so that's pretty good. And just across the street, Martin was going there with his Diego, with his electric scooter, and wanted to, you know, visit this building, but I was not prepared, shame on me. So that's actually as far as I got, because then this is gated off. And you want to take over from here, what it is and what we're about to talk, or you want me to go a little further?
Sure. I remember which building this is.
So this is, I pulled it from another reading recommendation. This is Little Nationalist in a Good Way from the German Detail magazine. So this means the house for female homeless in Barcelona. So this is by Vivas Arquitectos. And this is that building that I did not get in because, again, Martin did not do enough homework to say, okay, how likely is it that a guy, without having made, you know, an appointment, gets into a typology like that? Usually male of around these women are suspicious because they are the predators they want to basically, you know, protect the women from. And that's the reason why stupid Martin wasn't able to get in, but luckily we have the Detail magazine that we basically pull from. So what looks like a pretty generic building, like a box, you know, which it is, which is clad with corrugated metal, but as many, if not most of the projects that you share with us, this has inner values, because this is as many as a mass timber building that is very open and arid and has a lot of open spaces and even the private spaces. And this is not rocket science and not an innovation, but it's something that's been around for long. These are bunk beds that you, these are Murphy beds, or not bunk beds, that you pull out. So in the day they're in the wall, at night you pull them down. So this is something we, you know, we used to do, we don't do anymore. And then you got these open, airy courtyards as communal spaces, as breakout spaces. And the architects we remember, this is about the EBD, LCA, POE. So how are buildings holding up? And now, since we sent me in 21, and now we sent me again in 24 last year, we want to quickly revisit this building that we have been talking about by the same architects, but this is 3 years later, and this is still holding up the same nice way. You know, there isn't any trashing of the lanais or anything that you see the building. This is for elderly people, as transitional people up in age. And I make the comparison to the building by Alfred Yee here and Edward Killingsworth, which is a hotel, but it has that very same simple, you know, syntax of little lanai sticking out. But this one here is for, I guess, the purpose of in that context is more clever, because you stagger them, you offset them from each other. So you have a more clearance above you, right? You have one more floor above you to as sort of breathing space from the atmosphere. And this is the northern, and again, we talked about this project, we don't need to do again, but it's also these buildings, as you point out to us, Pedro, these are publicly funded in many cases. Sometimes they're PPP. They're on very small budgets, right? They're with very simple materials, but that is not a problem. In fact, the opposite, right? Is that fair to say, Pedro?
Yeah, the idea is to try to be creative with relatively small budgets. Of course, in the context of social housing, if you're doing a private building, you can do whatever you want and charge a much higher price. I wanted to mention something about the way these balconies are arranged, and it's reminding me, if we can go to the previous image. I think these are especially good for interaction between neighbors. It's not uncommon here in Barcelona to see people talking from one balcony to another. The neighbors interact through the balconies. So, and the fact that they're positioned in this way, it makes it easier to speak with the person who is in the balcony above you, because he's not right above you. No, you don't
Hmm.
have a plane of the floor that's closing your view. So you can have this kind of diagonal view, and it's I think it's very smart from that point of view. I'm not sure if the architect was thinking of this specifically, but because of what I've seen in other situations, I think this works better. And I'm guessing that elder people are even more inclined to do this because maybe they don't go out as much as younger people, for example, from the apartment. So they just can get on the balcony. And from one balcony, you can speak to at least 5 or 6 neighbors just sitting in the
And
balcony.
talking about the elderly in inclusive habitation is another thing that you wanted to focus on, Jay, by the way. And you, Pedro, reminded us that these architects are very creative in different ways, and they don't have just one size fits all as their signature. Their signature is to be customizing according to the circumstances and conditions. So here is something from them or even more recently, that is out of which we like to call cargo steel, which, to avoid to say shipping containers. And again, needless to say, Jay, we've been covering this ever since the beginning. 8 years ago, the first one, and some 4 years ago, we went back to that. So where are we here in Honolulu finally? Who is listening to us, right? And in Barcelona, they walk that walk while we here talk the talk, keep talking the talk. But we're not getting tired. Well, we are, but we can't give up. We just got to keep talking about it, because this is another thing that you guys do. So we had offered and promised to talk about this project here that we just touched on. So this was just last summer, nearing about a year ago, when we, like you live similar somewhere in the periphery, as you told us, right? So you're taking public transportation, and you see we got subways here, and people take their other personal transportation with them on the subway, and they do that. And then you end up pretty much in communities like this one here, that is, again, a couple of stations out there, and there's a development by these architects here, and it has this setting, which is that sort of, and this is a very PPP kind of project. And when you walk closer, eventually you're going to see, and there is, once again, this seems to be like a pattern. All of a sudden you see a box, right? So now, based upon what we just said, you might be curious, where are the inner values of that? But first of all, before you get closer, you see the similarity. There's corrugated fenestration there, and then there's openings, and you start to wonder, what might be behind. And then you can actually also close them and shed yourself away from either the sun or from other people looking at you. So these are micro perforated. So if you have them closed, you're not going to be in the dark, but you're still going to have a view that's like when buses have the advertisement on it. It's this pixeled print on there, right? So you cannot look inside unless there's light in there in the evening, but daytime you cannot look inside, but you can actually look out. So when you look closer, again, very, very simple, but very strategically effective materiality. And then again, I took my sons there, and I didn't want to, okay, there's dad, and you know how that is with your son, Pedro, okay, here come dads again, and all they are interested is in architecture. So I said, okay, I'm going there. Maybe I take a day off. You don't need to, and that's the best way to make them come with you, right? So, and we first of all were with you, by the way. So you encourage them, then maybe it's not a bad thing to be with dad and check these things out. Thank you for that. You paved the way for that. We get to that soon. So basically, you get into this building, and then you are there. But then you get drawn up into this vortex of an atrium, and you can already see materiality. This is not, as Howard Hughes does it here, to put some fancy veneer on, a thin layer, skin, of wood veneer. But this is once again, solid timber, mass timber. That atrium then goes higher than the building, than the roof is. And you have a very sophisticated, however, still relatively low-tech way of venting the hot air out that rises up. And this is something you also shared in the projects we're going to get to, that how we first got to know each other. So then again, these are very, very simple tech. They're still technology, but they're relatively simple and low tech. And this is very low tech, where you basically router out, slits where actually the air can go through, and you basically naturally ventilate your space. You also can pivot it open to the inside. So these are very bioclimatic means and methods to basically get the buildings feeling and being comfortable. So and people start to own them and start to customize them and put their planter pots on there. And you got to, this is not something that people say, oh wow, this is amazing, this looks homey, right? This is like, okay, what is this, right? People might say this is a prison because there's some guarding there, there's some metal, but once you do this to it, right, and it opens up, it's like, okay, wow. And this is something very clever, where you can actually open this semi-public space up that becomes a buffer to your private space, and you create this additional semi-private, semi-public courtyard that mitigates between the major atrium courtyard and your unit. So this is indeed, once again, this is amazing. This gives a quality to life that is also not like, one size fits and you got one solution for all the situations, right? This is something that is dynamic. It's kind of socio and environmentally dynamic.
And that particular project benefits from the fact that it's like on the limit of the urbanized area. So you have, that's not just a bunch of trees. It's like actually I'm not sure if I can tell this, the mountain or the trees on an area that's, I couldn't even call it a park properly. It's just where the city finishes, and there's like a small forest that starts.
We will actually see that at the end. We walk around and we will get to that. And this is us actually having been walking around. So we are on, so what's reflecting is actually that backside on that bluff. So we were like peeking in and saying, hey, what? And it looks rather dubious from the outside, as that seems to be the theme of this architecture. It's the opposite of the Victorian. I'm showing off, right? My home is my castle, and I got this big porticus that impresses. But once you walk through, you're kind of disappointed. Here it's the opposite. You're almost from a populist point of view, right? You're like, okay, this doesn't look interesting. It's just a box, right? A metal shack, maybe for birds, right? But then once you go inside, it shows these inner values, and it becomes very, very rich. And then this has been pulled from, because we were unprepared and unannounced. We needed to actually sneak in and ask but this is also an encouragement, because this show, if anything, we encourage you all to go to Barcelona. This is just an appetizer. And then you can do like we do and be the adventurous and be the scavenger hunters, and you find nice inhabitants, and people living there who actually let you in, because they sense, you have good intentions. But we didn't get really into as far as into a unit. So this we had to, again, pull from the Detail magazine. And again, people bring, flowers in there and planters. The detailing is very sort of, again, authentic, very make-upped. It's the raw stuff. It's only zinced, and it's flat steel, and but it's very, very nicely designed. Even to the egress stairs, this is us going down into the fire escape stairs, and you see this very raw and rustic. Jay, you've just came out of the Brutalist movie that won an Oscar. Right? This is Brutalist in a way. It's very sort of uncovered. But in the main areas, it's wood, which is more warm and is more inviting and more charming. And so eventually people will also occupy that space more than it so far is. And this is the situation that you were talking about. This is at the beginning of the bluff. You also see this very efficient and effective rainwater drainage system, which is that V-shaped in section gutter, a big gutter thing, where the water from that slope comes down and just gets basically drained away that way. And this is the situation that you're talking about. And by the way, only this building doesn't walk around and says, "Oh, I'm post-fossil, I'm non-carbon, I'm whatever." This building basically says, "Well, I'm nice to live in, and by the way, as on the side, I am BREEAM rated." So this is the UK, coming from the UK, one of the energy efficiency rating systems. So this building here is pretty much off the grid, and meets close to net zero goals, but not as like a bragging, okay, that's my concept, right? That's my genetic code to begin with, as every plant does not say, I'm sustainable, I'm just a living organism, and that's why I am. So the building is the same way, right?
Totally agree. It's a very nice project, and as you said, it's not about like making a big fuss about being zero emission and environmentally friendly and all of this. It's already kind of in the DNA of the project, and in some teams of architects. Fortunately, we have several of those around here. Probably
Yeah.
likely not all of them, but enough of them to make already an impact, and I think to influence others, to encourage others to join this path.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to come like contagious in a good way, and certainly there have been times where the beginning of the neighborhood, it looks rather sort of very like a neighborhood that was built like on steroids, and you got the 60s in a very sort of brutalist way as the one in the past, that in the back there. But then architects change that, and so when you get off the tram station, the first thing you run into this, and I had to do thinking, what is this? And this is actually a public library that's just equally nice, that's just built into some topography and is nested in there, and has again these open walkways and these screens. So yeah, as you're right, there is this genetic code that gets created and seems to self-duplicate itself. And again, if you're saying, okay, there's another mass timber building, how do we do this here? There's tons of shows out there, pulling from my personal professional practice, as well as working with the emerging generation. Here's just a couple of the shows. They've always been doing that. All we need is then, developers and contractors saying, okay, let's just be as courageous as you guys are in Barcelona. And so we should spend a couple more minutes on where we go then from next time on, because this is the beginning of us getting to know each other. There were these street posters that already, it was advertisement, the events that you had going on. So I went online, and once again was trying to tell my sons, and their girlfriends, Dad is going to do what he always does, check out architecture. And I find this event, which happens to be even free, and you can't beat free, right? So I basically secured the tickets, 4 tickets, and then that was the event there. And then we went there. So there we are. Here is you pointing, and I let you fully take over, because this is just me basically having been the one who documented your tour with having taken the pictures. But you please from now on take the lead and tell us what that is and what you all shared with us.
So this is a super interesting project because it's a cooperative building. These cooperatives existed in Catalonia at least since the 1920s. This particular one is from originally from the 1920s, and this kind of building, so it's a combination of things. It's interesting from wherever you look at it because the history of the building is interesting, the way it worked, what it was supposed to be, and of course the process of transformation and all the history process. So this building, for example, was this cooperative. Cooperatives were worker associations, basically factory workers, that were looking for example, for social spaces, but also, for example, a very important part of the cooperative was they had a store on the ground floor that sold products, basic products like food and things like this, at prices that were always fair. So we already had back then people speculating with prices and rising prices unfairly and depending on the circumstance. So it's like you had like fixed prices in these stores, and you would make sure that you would have a fair price. So it was, and at the same time, it was a space that was encouraging social encounters, associations, maybe even political ones, but not necessarily. So it was a very lively building. And it's the style and the character is very peculiar. No, it's a little difficult to maybe to guess what it is, and unless you read the sign, there's a sign that's still there. No, Cooperativa Obrera. Lealtad Sansenca is the name of the cooperative building. And then this building, evidently during the fascist regime, didn't work exactly the way it was intended to. And eventually it started changing. At one point there was a factory working there. There was a large space that was kind of like an auditorium kind of space for meetings of the neighbors or of the members of the cooperative. And that turned it's not this one actually, it's the one on top of this. This is where the store was, where the original store was. And there was like a small factory, and they were doing turron, like nougat, here. And on the upper floor, it became at one point it became like a discotheque. So it's had like many uses during the years. And at one point, it was like almost semi-abandoned. And the neighbors said, what should we do? What can we do about this? Can we save this building? This is part of the history of our neighborhood. It's a neighborhood with a very strong tradition regarding neighbors associations, cooperatives, and all of this. This is the upper space, the auditorium space that has been recycled into just an upgraded auditorium. Actually, it's more or less keeping the original function, and it's a space that can be used by neighbors, paying a relatively small price. So you pay like a symbolic fee to use the auditorium, either regularly, for example, you want to use it for a series of you want to do a theater performance, a music performance. They do all kinds of things here. Um, and so the neighbors had the backing of the city hall, but not. This was more like I could say a private uh, uh, mm, entrepreneurship, but one done by an association of neighbors. So they decided to recycle this space and try to recover the spirit of the cooperative. So now you have a series of different activities. It's kind of a weird building in its origins because it seemed like the a joining of three different buildings. No, and one of the things they managed to do, the intervention, the new project, managed to create a stronger sense of unity in the building, creating this like open courtyard where they emptied part of the space. They got rid of some of the spaces that existed in order to have a better lighting and a better environmental conditions in the whole building. At the same time, it reinforces the sense of unity that it was mentioned because you have this like very open, like an open street on the inside that connects all the parts of the building. And well, you have there the details. And on the previous picture, for example, one idea that was very interesting, the one where you see the parts, the remnants of the stairway here. So one of the ideas was to leave like the scars of the things that have existed before. This is a deliberate decision, no, and not just the ones from the origins from the 1920s, but also to show the multiple changes of function that had occurred during the life of the building. And this is something that it's not unique to this building, but I think it's a very interesting approach to show, at least partially, these different layers of history that they give the building like a soul in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I want to say, you were just, when you were saying the name of the building, you were speaking in your language, although that was, Martin, funnily here, when you go on phones, it automatically picks up like your language, or in this case, my adopted language. But then when I came there, and I felt really stupid, because you had to say, well, this tour is in Catalan, because we are in there in Catalonia. So then Martin and Joey and Lenny and the girlfriends were like, just okay, we don't get any of that because we come unprepared. So then you asked the other guys if it's okay to switch in English, and then, as we've now know for many shows, what you said is like, okay, hopefully my English is good enough. We now know it's more than good enough. So thankfully, then I was able to understand what it was all about. So thanks for everyone in the tour to also basically be with us on that one. So yeah, you talked about I mean, first of all, we have to say, of course, in these days, the most ecological, sustainable, responsible building is the one that already exists, period. And for that matter, we keep it.
Important.
Exactly. So that's why these projects are actually, more important typologically than actually building new buildings. And if you can't repurpose, recycle something, you have to build new. But then you have to build new in the best possible way. So this makes these projects that we're going to talk about and also continue to do, because that was just the beginning of the tour. And you showed us other buildings from the same typology of basically repurposing. And also the next project that we walked to also has the architectural office of one of the firms that you continue to share projects of theirs. We see, where they work and where they design these projects. And they're also very refreshingly don't look like we usually consider architectural office to be, very sort of show-offy and formal and institutional, right? So the whole idea of cooperation is really sort of infused through all the levels of that, from the typology, from the way people work, and even how people basically become tenants. That is, so maybe we leave it with that. And this is just a detail of, like, with all the obstacles and all the fire codes and all this stuff, you see there's ways around it. So obviously sprinklering is not something that is innovative or something that we but it's something you can certainly use. And so this is an all steel infill, and obviously through clever understanding of building codes, this is all possible. And so we have great open-minded people here on the island as well, so to support these things. Okay, Jay, so wrapping up here, how does this all sound and look to you, and what can we learn from this for us back in Honolulu?
I have some scattered thoughts for you, Martin, Pedro. You see the staircase behind Martin, to Martin's left, the antique staircase from previous iterations of the building. That's very natural, but from an aesthetic point of view, I think I would try to reprocess the bricks so they look at least a little bit like the new bricks, or the bricks to the back. And I would probably make that into a graphic so that it would be more aesthetically pleasing. although I certainly agree that it should be preserved. But that's a scattered thought. My other thought, which is I think is more important, in your very first picture, Martin, your very first one, I think it was a home for women, very beginning. It struck me that either A, it had a trompe l'oeil effect on the windows, where the windows at the top were shorter than the bottom, but that could be a photographic perspective thing. I don't know. But I wondered in general whether that is in play or has been in play in Barcelona, where the windows at the top are shorter than the ones at the bottom, giving you the impression that the building is actually taller. And when you stand at the bottom on the street, you can feel that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that my perception, and this goes back way back for decades and decades, is that Europeans have a different sense of space than Americans. In America, you want your, and this doesn't happen in Hawaii, I'm afraid, but in America, you stand further away from the person, and your hallways are maybe wider, and your rooms, at least ideally, are wider. And see that what's right behind Martin now strikes me that that's close. It's yes, that did appear in the Brutalist, where the walls were pretty close. The overhead was very high, but the walls were close. And maybe that's a European thing. Maybe it's a Bauhaus thing. I don't know. But it seems to me that in Europe, spaces, it's a different concept about spaces. And the other thing is, I love that building with the alternating lanais, where you could not only look across, but you could look up and you could look down. And so you could have a conversation with a number of people. And that is really dynamite. That doesn't happen. And I think that part of the space thing in Hawaii and probably the US is that we don't really care to know our neighbor. We don't do architectural things like common kitchens, to meet our neighbor, to spend time with our neighbor. We'd rather be isolated in a kind of isolated, that first one, the very, keep going. Yeah, that one, the one you couldn't get into. Is there trompe l'oeil there? I don't know. You got to look. Maybe there is. So anyway, this sense of space, I'm very into the sense of space. And I know that some of the projects you've been showing us, they have luxurious space in them, but they also have this kind of 17th, 18th century limited space where people that were closer, they talked to each other. When they stood to have a conversation, they were closer than an American conversation. Or possibly a British conversation, I don't know. But I think it's worth looking at that issue to see what people like in a particular culture. My experience in 1965 in Barcelona, I found the streets narrow. I found there were a lot of gargoyle type, decorations on the buildings, and it was very lush with those decorations. I also found the buildings were dirty. They hadn't been cleaned. The ones that you're showing are clean, including these revitalized projects. They're clean on the outside anyway. And the inside is very light and airy, which I don't think was the case in the 17th and 18th century. I think it was all closed in. They might have had lanais where you could talk to the next neighbor, but the buildings felt heavy, really heavy. And that's gone now. I also wanted to mention that I spent some time in a kind of ghetto at Calle Calvario número 5 in Madrid. And I spent some time with a Spanish guy there who was a migrant laborer from France, and with his family when Franco was in charge. And nobody would mention Franco's name. They would never say anything, even in the privacy of their own home. They wouldn't talk about Franco. It was dangerous business, which is kind of scary today because we're seeing that happen elsewhere right now. But what I want to tell you is that they lived around a courtyard, in a very tight little courtyard, and they could see and talk with every neighbor in the courtyard. It was very European in that sense. But then Jose, who was my patron, who took me out, he took me out to the outskirts of Madrid, somewhere, where the countryside met the suburbs. And he showed me where his sister lived. And this is in 1965. And it was beautiful. It was brilliant. It was new. It was, quality, humane design. I'm saying to myself, what a difference between, the old, dirty 17th, 18th century, heavy buildings with tight streets and turns and all that, to what he showed me at the outskirts of Madrid, which I assume is going to be the same, or was the same in the later days of Franco around Barcelona. And that was the technique, the architecture, the aesthetic that in many ways is evident in what you're showing us today.
Pedro, in response?
Well, I'm not that familiar with all the projects from that time, but it's true that there was already some, even within even during the Franco regime, there were some pretty interesting architects that managed to kind of maybe avoid the restrictions or the kind of architecture that was encouraged from the state. That was like a very traditional and uninnovative architecture. And we had, for example, one of the most famous ones we had in Barcelona was a guy named Coderch. And Coderch, for example, he actually did a couple of social buildings. There's kind of a famous one. I'm not sure if we mentioned it before. In Barceloneta, it's a relatively small building, but that's a case of social housing from the 1960s. And then he also made some more high-end apartments, but he made very, very interesting projects. He was not the only architect who did this, but they were kind of moving away from as I said, from the kind of architecture that was kind of encouraged from the state. So it is true that there was. I'm not surprised that you ran into such an interesting building back in the day. Because maybe not the majority, because Martin was mentioning, for example, these buildings in this neighborhood where this building is, the one we're seeing, there's a fair amount of buildings that are much less interesting than this one, like high towers and things that look like very almost like design in series, and the kind of building that you could put in Barcelona, or you can put it maybe in some city in the United States, or you can put it in France or in Germany, and you wouldn't know the difference. So there's a little bit. I think there was a little bit of both. There was like this very interesting architecture done in very large quantities, and maybe in lesser quantities, but there was also this already back in the 1960s, this trend toward looking for something different and trying to do things in a more humane way, as you said, and a different approach, trying to look for ways of connecting, for example, with Mediterranean tradition, not doing these buildings without any character that you could put anywhere in the world almost. And if you look at the building isolated, if you cut out all the context, it's impossible to guess where the building would be. And on the contrary, in other examples, there was this idea that doesn't necessarily mean that you're imitating things from the past, but that you're looking for a way to fit the building in the climate, in the way of people are used to live, the way people live their daily lives, and from a cultural point of view. And all of these things were taken into account, as I said, at least by some architects. And I think that's part of the tradition. I think most of the contemporary architects have inherited this knowledge in some ways, and they're upgrading it and updating it constantly.
I think we're.
Martin, I want to add one other thought, if I may. So, I talk about public space and its connection with democracy. And public space can be used to enhance democracy, as it was in classical times. But public space can also be used to undermine democracies. It's a tool, and it can be weaponized. I'm afraid, and we've seen that. Look at the 30s in Germany. The public spaces were very powerful, but they were powerful for the wrong reasons. So we're talking about space here, and I would make a guess, Pedro. I would say that the space that you are describing and working on in Barcelona is similar. The nuance of it, the creativity of it, is similar to other countries in Europe. Not all of them in the same degree, but it's the universal language. Architecture, you can quote me on this, Martin. Architecture is the universal language. And right now we have attempts by various leaders in Europe to form their own brand new European society, and not include the United States for very good reason, happening in Washington. And there are meetings, there's been 2 or 3 meetings in the last week or two where European leaders have gotten together and tried to bond up to make security agreements and trade agreements and all that. And so the universal language that I believe, and I'm just coming to this as a theory, I believe helps them do this, is the universality of architecture in Europe. Do you feel there's any benefit to my theory?
Absolutely, and I think when you're saying we Europeans for good reasons turning away from Americans, it's only turning away from some Americans, because Europeans will not give up believing in the others. So that is the point where I think this is you guys mentioned as art and architectural historians that yes, zeitgeist can be basically a prison that I get myself in and not out anymore. But on the other hand, which you also mentioned, is that it doesn't have to be that way, because as long as we live in market economies, you find clients who are liberal and forward thinking, and you build with them regardless of what your government is trying to tell you, and regardless how they want to basically roadblock you and boycott you. You can basically, and this is what you said, Pedro, even through the times, we will eventually get to Walden 7 by Bofill, which was still under a dictatorship. And it is such a powerful social, sustainable built manifesto that you can see it actually as a, and we were last time saying we got to be careful about the la résistance, because quantitatively, right, it was only a few % of the population. So as it's used, as you correctly remind us, Jay, it's used, more braggishly as actually it's substantiated, right? But let's say, make a movement powerful. And that's what you see in Barcelona, that regardless, and there's big politics going on, and, Catalans saying we want to be independent and we don't want to have to do with a national government, and, President Sanchez and whatnot. So it's like not, this is all paradise and they're all like one happy family, right? But regardless, or maybe because, they basically go down to basically, and yes, we have Ursula von der Leyen, our European Commission president, who has been launching the new European Bauhaus and the new Green Deal, and this will continue to be. And these are people who contributing to that, because they make buildings that are basically people and planet peaceful, right? These are off the grid buildings. They believe in climate change and they do something about it and actually for it. And as importantly, they believe in keeping every people happy. So these are significant resistance, actions shown to support. And I absolutely believe in this movement that we're getting ourselves into shift with Thomas Auer from TUM, and it's growing, and it should become what you were saying, Jay. It was way back. It was called international style, but that was a formal approach that you say the same box fits everywhere. And now it shifts to a performative. It's where we should make it based on nature and people. And if that becomes the foundation, that can be an equally universal approach that obviously materializes itself as critical regionalism, which hasn't been around since yesterday. Kenneth Frampton and others have been propagating that, right? But that's the new kind of social political, movement that you address the problem at the root, right? Of like what Professor G, we were quoting him, was saying. The problem we have in all these authoritarian regimes is that these dictators want to tell us you're in trouble with the future of your kids, and so you need me as the strong man to help you. No, here it's, and I want to also stress the cooperative that you said, Pedro, right? That has been traditionally, thank you for saying that building has a cooperative tradition, and that cooperative tradition is being basically evolved, right? And cooperative means nothing but, guess what? We the people, Jay, right? That is in our constitution. And we the people take that in our hands, and we don't need any top-down people blocking us. We build it up from bottom up. That's what cooperative is. And it is a very, very powerful tool as to basically, join that. And isn't that an uplifting conclusion here? Can't be any better. Thank you guys for that. So we're gonna feed it more and grow it more in 2 weeks when we will be back. It's going to be 3 weeks. So we sent Martin back to speaking of shift and TUM and to tighten these relationships. So we'll be de Soto for the next 2 weeks, as we did this week, because we did last week. And so see us back in 3 weeks to, again, show us more of that, Pedro, and show us, again, architects and how they work on these projects. And your new article will be illustrated and all the goodies. And it seems like it's never ending. It's like, seriously, they're sprouting there, upspringing. It's like, there's the seed is planted of this movement, and now it's just going crazy and viral. It's super exciting. And so I need to bring that virus over on my way back, right? And we get it finally back here, because again, Hale, Manoa, Jay, from mid-1960s, we had that. This is a co-op building with communal areas. So we had that as well as, in Barcelona back then, although a little suppressed and more kind of out of the inner emigration, because the political situation was suppressive, right? But it not suppressed the architect. So that, again, stressing that positive note. Thank you guys for the encouragement, and see us all back in 3 weeks for even more amazing of that. Bye-bye.